National Geographic, which turned 134 on the 13th January 2022, has been documenting the world and celebrating people. Today's assembly is dedicated to those who brought knowledge to us through telling stories. We would like to celebrate those storytellers by taking you through time and try to understand why knowing about the freshwater ecology, to understand the future behavior of beluga whales, and learn about the ancient humans that survived a supervolcano.
On a cool February morning, around 60 people gathered on the Sierra Nevada foothills to take part in a ceremony that, for many decades, was banned. Fire has always been a part of California's landscape. But long before the vast blazes of recent years, Native American tribes held annual controlled burns to clear out underbrush and to encourage new plant growth.
Now, with wildfires raging across Northern California, joining other record-breaking fires in recent years, government officials say that tackling the fire problem will mean bringing back good fire, much like California's tribes once did. We don't put fire on the ground and not know how it is going to turn out. Ron Good, tribal chairman, tells the group. That's what makes cultural burning, because we cultivate.
California is the epicenter of the wildfire epidemic. Over the past few years, wildfires have gotten more destructive, more deadly, and more expensive to put out. Many link this to climate change, but that's not the whole story.
Fire doesn't have to be scary.
Fire on our term is good. Fire not on our term could be bad and devastating.
Some believe that fighting fires has made things worse.
Europeans are gonna fight fire. It's like, why don't you fight rain or fight earthquakes? You know, it's just kind of this ridiculous idea.
The Karuk tribe in Northern California thinks the only solution is to embrace fire. Before European colonization, Indigenous tribes practiced traditional burning for generations as a way to actually protect their forests from catastrophic wildfires.
Humans have been using fire as a management tool for millennia.
Prescribed fire is the most effective tool we have to prevent wildfires.
For over 100 years, federal and state policy has pushed to put out every fire at all costs. Now, the Karuk tribe is leading the movement to change that. They believe that both their land and their culture depend on it.
Our birthright was taken from us as fire people and fix the world people, when we're trying to restore that for the kids. We're playing catch up. We need to renew our relationship with fire. The clock is ticking.
So this is home. This is where my family's been since the beginning. And over the years, I just kind of watched it get thicker and thicker because of the laws there were. We weren't allowed to treat it traditionally like our ancestors used to do. By prescribed fire, we were able to keep the invasive species out and keep the heavy fuel loading down to a minimum, so that way our resources like the elk, the bears, and the deer, they can still pass through.
Traditional ecological knowledge is a label used to describe and give validity to traditional, local folk knowledge spanning from ecology to environmental metaphysics. Unlike other elements of Indigenous knowledge, it has been embraced by modern science, particularly in the field of land management, conservation, medicine, and botany. Part of the interest stems from growing awareness of the scale and urgency of the ecological damage confronting us. Nikolai Mangrin describes that traditional ecological knowledge is seen as having passed the practical test of being useful for generations of people.
Cultural survival is the phrase that is taken around amongst the political leaders, sociologists, anthropologists, and of course geographers. Indigenous people across the globe are struggling for the cultural survival of their communities. Historical and contemporary challenges moved us further away from what was norm and common characteristics for all human beings, and for it to become part of Indigenous culture.
From the history of colonization to the idea of consensual production of knowledge, we have lost our multicultural and unique concepts of living well. The Assembly intends to look back and would like to close by encouraging people to learn about and become allies with Indigenous practices, as ultimately we are all impacted by the same threats.
Through the sharing of language roots, both verbal and written, we can confirm that there was movement amongst the countries of East Asia. The cultures of East Asia also have shared beliefs. East Asia is made up of the countries China, Japan, Mongolia, North Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. China takes up the majority of East Asia as land, and a major part of all these countries are mountainous. These regions are devoid of rain, giving a tough life to their inhabitants. Plains were densely populated, but the uninhabitable and harsh landscape and climate created mystery, a strong sense of hierarchy, and instilled a respect for authority in the people.
In the days of Kublai Khan, merchants traveled a dangerous road, carrying precious cargoes of jade, gunpowder, sandalwood, and silk. Ancient caravan trails crossed a mysterious country we now call China, a country with a stunning diversity of landscapes. Today, the worn roads pass through lost civilizations amid shifting sand dunes, wind-scarred rocks, or treacherous mountain passes. The fragile link connecting Imperial China to the rest of the world was called the Great Silk Road. From Persia to China came pears, peaches, walnuts, indigo dyes, frankincense and myrrh. From Central Asia came lapis lazuli, jade, almonds, onions, and superb horses for the empire's armies. From India came the lotus, pepper, spinach, sandalwood, and most important, cotton, which came into China through the Turpan Oasis. From China came green ginger, millet, roses, camellias, mulberry trees, and precious silk. Fundamental ideas of art, science, and religion also traveled in both directions on this road, transforming east and west. Even though the caravan route was well established in the 13th century, traveling it was still a hazardous undertaking. Marco Polo wrote of his own desert crossing, "Travelers who intend to cross the desert rest in this town for a week to refresh themselves and their beasts."
During the Han Dynasty, different forms of the dragon dance were described in ancient texts. In ancient China, for example, the dragon Yinglong was considered a rain deity, and the Shenlong had the power to determine how much wind and rain to bring over the mountains. People of different cultures experience the three general expressions of the sacredness of mountains, such as the mountain is center of the universe, or the source of water and the source of life.
In myth, mountains are mysterious, dangerous, and often have cool stuff inside them. Because they reach towards the sky, they often host the homes of gods. Mount Olympus is probably the best known mountain that's both home to a pantheon and also a real place where you can go and eat grape leaves and drink ouzo. And even without all that Greek grog, mountains are perilous, as anyone who has ever spent time climbing them knows. Often the homes of monsters, the sites of avalanches, basically big ol' heap of challenge. And if you're wondering now why anyone would ever go there, well, you can't forget that mountains also contain valuable minerals. And in myths, that means that they're the site of great treasure, especially gold.
Mythical dragons and the observable lions are believed to possess qualities which include great power, dignity, fertility, wisdom, and auspiciousness. The appearance of a dragon is both fearsome and bold, but it has a benevolent disposition and it was an emblem to represent imperial authority. The movements in a performance traditionally symbolizes historical roles of dragons demonstrating power and dignity.
The Way of Life of Canada encapsulates the imaginative, culinary, scholarly, humor, melodic, political, and social components that are illustrative of Canada and Canadians. Since Canada's commencement, Its way of life has been affected by European culture and customs, generally by the British and French, the founding class of the settlers' colony, and by its own native societies. After some time, components of the way of life of Canada's outsider populaces have become fused to shape a Canadian social mosaic. Certain fragments of Canada's populace have likewise been impacted by American culture because of shared land and geographic closeness.
But muktuk is an Inupiaq word that means the combination of the whale skin and blubber, that is, the underlying layer of fat beneath the skin. Muktuk is indispensable for the people's survival because it cleans blood cells with the so-called omega-3 fatty acids and provides the necessary vitamins A and C, thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin in an environment where they cannot practice agriculture. Whale is a unique food among circumpolar people and is an essential element of their long-term survival. The term muktuk was often used as a metaphor for cultural survival, but also an acknowledgement of pride in regaining whaling rights.
This is the frozen tundra of Alaska, deep in the Arctic, where winter temperatures rarely rise above negative 20 degrees Celsius. For generations, the Inupiaq people have called this area home. Over the years, some traditions have been replaced by modern technology. Diesel-powered snowmobiles have replaced dog sleds, and homes are now heated by electricity. But many traditions live on, including whale hunting. The Inupiaq are among only a few indigenous groups that can legally hunt whales for subsistence. Dorcas Stein is an Inupiaq elder.
There's 40-some whaling captains here in the North Slope alone. Once we start whaling, this whole community changes. The whaling crews are comprised of extended family members. It could be brothers, sisters, uncles, relatives, cousins, where almost the whole village is involved in whaling.
Using several small boats, the Inupiaq fishermen snare the whale using a harpoon. Abraham, co-captain of a whaling crew, explains the next step.
We use a darting gun and a shoulder gun. It's a brass firearm. It's a projectile. It goes in about 4 feet, and then it detonates and explodes.
The meat and blubber from the whale are then shared among the members of the community. Many store their meat as generations before them did, in underground ice cellars.
Ducks we're hunting this spring. And over here, last 2 years, we got 2 whales, 40-foot whale. It was over here. It weighs about 80,000 pounds.
In many ways, little has changed for the Inupiaq people. While the modern world slowly creeps in around them, they still value the traditions of their ancestors, while maintaining a deep respect for their natural surroundings. For producer Abdul Aziz Khan, Jim Burtell, VOA News.
In the British Isles, their history goes back over 1,000 years and is loosely based on the place they live in. The famous Scottish kilt actually originated from a practice the people took up when they first settled in Great Britain. Due to the roughness of the land, the people who settled there divided into clans. The clans generally wore a kilt, which helped when scaling steep hills, and the kilt's design, or tartan, was unique to each clan. These clans still exist today, helping keep the Scottish culture alive. These kilts are generally worn for cultural events, paired with kiltos, which generally has a plaid pattern. In Scottish dances, dancers usually wear a sporran or a belt with a prominent buckle.
So before I cover its survival uses, let's cover some of the basics of core body temperature regulation so we can better understand how we can use the plaid to battle the elements. So in basic physics, there are 3 ways heat is lost: through radiation, conduction, and convection. And in the outdoors, this best translates as when we expose our skin on a still cold day, we experience heat loss through radiation. Chilly. When we sit or lay down on the cold bare ground, we experience conduction as the earth sucks out our body heat. And when we get wet by the rain or sweat and moisture evaporates or is blown by the wind, we experience convection. So simply put, how to battle these in cold climates is to layer up, keep off the wind and wet, and stay off the ground. This applies to how you use your clothing and when creating shelter, and as I'll show you, we can use the plaid to affect all three of these. Now let's look at the first two, and here we must learn from the masters. What I mean by that is learning from the wildlife in your environment, a concept known as biomimicry. Take the red deer for example. Here is a piece of red deer winter hide, and from it we can decipher 3 defined layers. Closest to the skin is a layer of fine, soft, downy hair known as ground hair. This provides an insulative base layer for the animal, which also helps wick moisture away, keeping it warm. Then there is multiple layers of hair, which in the case of the red deer are hollow, thus trapping air, keeping it insulated. The third, outermost layer is known as the guard hairs and are for keeping off the wind and wet. They form a dense mat when flattened by the wind and rain, and these hairs also produce a small amount of oil that helps the water bead off, stopping the moisture reaching the skin while also allowing breathability. Now we can mimic the deer by how we use our clothing, both modern and historical, with a wick base layer, multiple layers of insulation, and finally a protective wet windy or shell layer. And you could argue that this outer shell layer is the most important for keeping you warm in bad weather, and it's here the plaid is primarily used. And just like the guard hairs of the red deer, we can mimic its function in both the plaid and modern jackets by having a densely woven fabric treated with a hydrophobic substance. And in the case of the plaid, traditionally they would have still retained the natural oil from the sheep, known as lanolin, and I have a whole video discussing this. And modern jackets are treated with synthetic proofing. Now let's compare these two shell layers to learn a bit more. And in terms of comfort, well-fitting and lightweightness, modern jackets win hands down, and the technology for these keeps on getting better. But what can't they do? Well, they can only do one thing, and often the more complex something is, the more things there is for it to go wrong. They don't have much insulation by themselves, and even a small spark from a campfire can easily burn holes in them. Now in comparison, the plaid is bulky, heavy and cumbersome, but as I'll show you, it can be used in a ton of different ways, and its simplicity means reliability. It provides more insulation alone, and although generally less waterproof, as it's made from wool, it retains 80% of its insulative value even when it's soaking wet. Wool also swells when wet, providing a wind barrier. Wool is also fire retardant against your average sparks and embers, so you can rest easy next to your campfire.
Cultural survival envisions a future that respects and honors Indigenous peoples' inherent rights and dynamic cultures, deeply and richly interwoven in lands. In grade 9, they are trying to create awareness and survive cultures in modern ways so that our endeavor reaches the young teenage audience. The first is a website where we are putting together our research on different tribes, and then we're intending to interact with our audience through cultural cuisine, a sustainable clothing line, and a video game.
Hi, my name is Thea, and I'm in the 9th grade, and me and my fellow classmate Karan are going to be talking about Aboriginals living in Australia.
Reasons for research. A major issue for the Aboriginals in Australia is their working and living conditions. Aboriginal unemployment rates are 3 times that of the non-Aboriginal. One of the many reasons for this is the lackluster education received by the Aboriginals. An example of their culture being diminished are the laws passed by the Australian government in the 1970s that banned their mother tongues from being spoken. Some would say that their ways of life have all but been lost. Despite this, a cultural revival for the Aboriginal people is still very much possible. Granted, those with power share in our beliefs surrounding the revitalization of native communities. We intend for this to leave a mark in the hearts of those who believe diversity and cultural survival are necessary in our advancement as a race. Past life. The Aboriginals led a hunter-gatherer lifestyle before the European colonizers arrived. Colonization severely disrupted Aboriginal welfare in the form of diseases and genocide. Up until the late 1700s, they lived their lives whilst keeping in mind 5 key interconnected elements of Indigenous culture: land, family, law, ceremony, and language. Stone tools found near Lake Mungo date back 50,000 years. It is speculated that the modern-day boomerang was originally developed by Australian Aboriginals.
I'm now going to be talking about Aboriginal methods. Fire stick farming. Fire stick farming is a method Aboriginals have used where they burn vegetation in a controlled way and a certain way. This improves the health of the land and wildlife. Another one is creating medicines. Aboriginals have created medicines for years by either extracting antiseptics such as tea tree oil to heal infects or harvesting latex to treat ulcers and more. Scientists should use Aboriginal knowledge and advice to help find more ways to develop and create new medicines. Another one is fish traps. For years, Aboriginals have created complex fish traps to catch fish. If people around the world use these complex traps, it'll help them in numerous ways. I'll now be talking about Aboriginal struggles. One is government neglect. In some parts of Australia, Aboriginals are not even supplied with clean water for days. They're denied healthcare services and education. There are 50 government programs to help Aboriginal where it's funded on taxpayers' money, but it's ineffective as no money is seen to help provide services to Aboriginals. Racism. Aboriginals are faced with racism every day by citizens and even some members of the government. 3. Land rights. Aboriginals don't even own their land in Australia, but in some parts they are. But in other parts, all Aboriginal lands are under the Crown. This means they do not even own their own land.
Good morning, everyone. Today we will be exploring the theme of cultural survival through the analysis of an Indigenous tribe's dietary preferences. We've done this by creating a menu inspired from the Saimain tribe, which consists of a group of Aboriginal people living in Bolivia in small communities composed of 20 to 30 families. They do primarily receive their food from agriculture, although hunting and fishing contribute significantly to the settlement supply. People of the tribe, interestingly, develop heart disease and other health issues on very rare occasions, and today we will be talking about the constituents present in this diet of theirs.
The dishes on our menu are all part of the traditional Bolivian cuisine. It constitutes of one starter, 2 main dishes, 1 drink, and 1 dessert to clearly show what people with the healthiest hearts in the world eat. Shocking to the modern generation, the tribe consumes an average of 2,500 calories per day, which plays an inevitable role in managing their state of health. Not only is this tribe devoid of any form of cholesterol-related issues like Kundavi mentioned, but research has proven from the tribe's CT scans, which analyze calcium deposits in artery plaques, that they have the youngest looking arteries ever recorded. Furthermore, 9 in every 10 people of the tribe lack any likeliness of heart disease, and hence science itself has come to the conclusion that their native eating habits are incredibly health beneficial. These very same eating habits, tied to the cultural ancestry of the tribe, have been passed on from generation to generation and have survived the modern style of eating.
Loaded with sugar, fat, calories and fat, multicultural brands with their glorified diets have not only tarnished our health, but have also had detrimental effects on Mother Earth's ozone layer. We may believe culture to be merely about festivities, but our traditional heritage preserves immense knowledge about food culture. Native ingredients have also been proven to be more beneficial for our health, and with local produce, food wastage can be significantly reduced. Cultural food advocates supporting the land food is grown on, nourishing our bodies and the environment in the process. Studies even show that carbon emissions can be reduced by up to 7% by using age-old food techniques. Globalized brands, however, with their commercially processed foods, leave their carbon footprints all over the planet. Modernization and forgetting our roots has led to a disconnect between people and their food, to the extent of not even recognizing it. The relationship between food and our environment is critical to securing a healthier future for our world. So let your food choices echo with compassion towards your culture and Mother Earth.
In today's digitalized world, we can spread the word and meaning of this restaurant through several ways, by posting ads on social media, reaching out to other restaurants, and also working with other Indigenous tribes to help promote our idea. Hopefully, we can also start a hashtag for our restaurant so that people have an opportunity to share their experiences going there, which will aid in making more people aware of our restaurant. Furthermore, as a result of the globalizing state of the world, we can also partake in several cross-cultural collaborations that can also increase awareness of other traditions and further advance in the aim of our brand.
In the future, we most likely look forward to expanding our brand through cross-cultural collaborations, which will hopefully provide us with the opportunity to open up in several other regions as we continue the exploration of Indigenous tribes through the menus in our restaurant, while simultaneously advocating for cultural preservation and ensuring that the masses are educated on the inevitable importance, impact, and influence of cultural survival. Thank you for listening to us today. We hope that through food, we were able to inform you about the value of cultural survival.
The fashion industry is a product of the modern age. Prior to the mid-19th century, more or less all clothing was handmade for everyone, either homemade or on order from dressmakers and tailors. By the beginning of the 20th century, with the rise of new technologies such as the sewing machine and the development of factories and department stores, clothing had been mass-produced in standard sizes and sold at fixed prices. Fashion can be viewed as a form of storytelling through self-expression, using clothes, footwear, and accessories.
Sustainable clothing. Sustainable fashion refers to clothing that is designed, manufactured, distributed, and used in ways that are environmentally friendly. Sustainable clothing has many benefits, some being that it uses less water, it reduces toxic waste, it reduces the amount of pesticides released into the environment, and the quality is higher.
Cultures and their clothing. Everyone has their own style and each culture shows their style through their own clothes. From saris, kurtas and lehengas, Indian culture has spread around the world rapidly. Before synthetic materials came to place and even today, India still is a mass user of cotton. Cotton is 100% recyclable and is one of the biggest sustainable resources to make clothes.
Benefits of our clothing line. Our clothing line aims to carry forward these trends, but also shine a light on how the fashion industry could use alternatives to popular materials to reduce waste consumption.
Natural versus synthetic products. Which one? Natural fabrics are made from plants and animals. On the other hand, synthetic fabrics are manufactured in factories using chemical synthesis. Rather than being recycled or finding repurposes, synthetic fibers slowly break down into smaller pieces called microplastics. These tiny pieces of plastic make their way into oceans, wildlife, food chains, and into our own food and water supplies.
Dyes and fibers. The natural dyes that we use are made from fruits, vegetables, flowers, and other plants. These are all biodegradable and renewable. There are also no health hazards using natural dyes. Natural fabrics like cotton, linen, wool, and muslin hold dye better than synthetic fibers. The color lasts longer and they don't require too much work before dyeing. Reducing clothing waste. Thrown away clothes either end up being landfilled or burned. To prevent this from happening, unwanted clothing could instead be recycled into new clothing or other products.
Benefits to the society. People will feel more comfortable and more free in our clothing, not only because of the different styles available, but also because of the comfortable, breathable material. Products like these also help us realize how big of an impact a small choice like wearing more sustainable clothing can do for the environment. A greener and cleaner environment for everyone.
This is a mood board that I came up with different designs of clothes that can be implemented in our sustainable clothing line.
This game is going to be about how culture is important and how it's been passed down for many generations. The game will also talk about how globalization is causing culture to die and how each one of us need to embrace our culture and heritage. It will also cover how our ancestors lived and how culture has played a huge role in shaping the way people live today. It will also cover some of the belief systems and how modern day science is destroying these beliefs. We will create this game, which allows people to make their own multiple choice questions that are fun yet interactive. There will also be a point system in order to add extra incentive for the players.
Cultural consequence of our process. The youth will learn about why culture is the driving factor, their ancestral beliefs, their language, their dressing, and many other things. The youth will also understand why globalization or digitalization era is destroying culture as well as heritage, and also what they should do, which is to embrace their culture and be proud of it. Environmental consequence of our project. The environment the player or the game users play a key role in shaping their learning and understanding. If the players are in an environment where the parents are not supportive of cultural beliefs and are brought up in an environment where culture is not practiced, then the game will help them understand the importance, which will lead to passing and spreading the information in family, friends, peer groups, as well as community.
The amount of time it will take to make a difference is playing the game about twice or thrice. Each game will take about 7 to 8 minutes.
Using the power of collective action, if many people come together to create more games that encourage culture and talk about why cultural survival is important, then this can influence many young generations.
We might face in the future include, while some groups of people with different perspectives might be against our goal to promote acceptance of several cultures, people might consider the game as influencing a certain culture, while people of indigenous tribes might have an issue with the way we present their tribe.
Elders in Alaska were able to infer the future behavior of beluga whales from the present behavior of beavers, which had reduced spawn and habitat for salmon. That would mean less food for the whales. Huntington recounted how he was initially confused about why they were talking about beavers, a part of freshwater ecology, until he made the connection himself. It was a more holistic view of the ecosystem.
One of the Maori elders once said, "The greatest ethic of all is the maintaining and flourishing of relationships. At the heart of a Maori lens is being connected, having relationships with people, the planet, and with purpose. When harms or imbalances are detected, corrective measures for the whole are decided and acted upon, rather than focusing on the spot treatment of symptoms."
Throughout our assembly, our attempt was to combine the ideal with practical expectations. Thank you for being part of our journey. Hope we have conveyed enough to ignite your thoughts on how we stand on our predecessors' knowledge, and only by acknowledging it, we will be awakened to the spirit of inquiry to move forward.